We're back with some more single stroke roll variations, hand-to-hand sticking around the drums for fills in this video. But I'm going to start off with one of the grooves we did last video, but played with a swing feel. Now this is where we have the left hand on the snare and the right hand on the hi-hat, and the left hand's playing really quiet ghost notes, and the right hand moves over to the snare in 2 and 4 for an accent. But in this case, we're doing it with a slight kind of swing feel. So let me play it for you. So it's similar to what we did in one of the other grooves in the last video, but the left hand is playing ghost notes on the snare with a kind of swing feel. The right hand's on the hi-hat and moves to the snare in 2 and 4, and the whole pattern is phrased with a swung kind of feel. Now let's move on to some fills. First thing is cliche fill that every first drummer who's been playing drums for 2 weeks learns how to do, and it's the simplest pattern. Every non-experienced drum programmer programs this up, and it's really boring and bland, but let's use it as a starting point. It's a basic straight-ahead groove with 16th notes with straight hand-to-hand sticking, just moving around the drums. So pretty boring, but it is a single stroke roll simply applied. There's myriads of ways of varying it, and we're going to look at some of them. Now here's an example. And here what we're going to do is move the stick on the third beat. So the hands move to a different drum on each 16th note of the third beat of the fill right here. So the first two are same as what we heard in the previous example, snare drum and then tom. And then on the third one, each single hit is on a different drum. So that's a nice variety, already making it more interesting. Daga daga do. So right hand on the snare, left on the tom, right on the floor tom, or the bigger tom rather, left on the floor tom, and then the last on the kick drum. So it's a simple variation. Let's move on to another one. Here we have one where the hand moves every 2 16th notes between different drums. So it's the same principle. It's all single strokes, rights and lefts, 1 E on the snare and on the tom, and then just moving different drums. And you can take a look and see what it looks like on the drum kit. So very simple variation. Let's move on to another one. And here we have an interesting one. And I like this where we get into replacing the kick drum or hi-hat with the different hands in various patterns, in this case a single stroke roll pattern. But here the bass drum replaces the left hand. So the right hand is going to be on the floor tom for the fill here. The bass drum substitutes for the left hand. So the single stroke roll pattern exists between the floor tom and bass drum. That's the conceptual way of thinking of it rather. That's the alternating right-left pattern is floor tom, kick drum, floor tom, kick drum. And then I'm just adding on the snare on 2 and 4 with the left hand since it's free, not being used for anything. And the left foot is playing quarter notes. Very interesting pattern. Here's what it looks like. It's a really good exercise. Drummers often do this, doing 16ths between the kick and the floor tom and then playing various patterns with their left hand moving between the drums. But a nice variation of the single stroke roll concept. Let's move on to another example. And this one is very similar. The right hand's on the floor tom, the bass drum substitutes for the left hand, and that's the single stroke pattern. But here the left hand plays the snare on every beat, and it's a little bit of a different feel. So it gives it a little bit more of a driving feel, a bit more energy to it. Here's another example. Here, the left hand's on the snare and the right hand moves between the toms. So the notion here is that the left hand remains fixed and the right hand hits the snare also, but other drums as well, moving around. So again, always single stroke sticking, but moving between the drums. Here it is with the drum icon. So another nice variation of the single stroke roll for fill. Now here's another example, and I really like this. This moves it into another conceptual realm where the right hand equals the right and left hand playing together. So R's in the R and L pattern, R becomes R and L together with one hand on the floor tom, one hand on the snare, and the lefts are played by the kick drum. So here the right hand's played by both hands together, one's the floor, the other's the snare, and the left hand is replaced with the bass drum. So very interesting conceptual variation of this type of sticking pattern, or how to apply it to a drum kit where one of the surfaces, the R, equals both hands together and the other one played by a foot. And finally, I want to end off with a swing variation. Now here I've broken it down. I have the ride and hi-hat just playing a typical swing pattern, and let me solo it and I'll play it for you and you'll hear what that sounds like. Let's speed up the tempo a little bit for this example. A lot of these examples work at many tempos, but this one is meant more for kind of faster swing. And here what we're doing is breaking up the left and right between the kick and snare. So the left hand is on the snare, the bass drum replaces the right hand. So the patterns are written as eighth notes, even though they're played with a swung feel. It's the way swing music is often notated. It's written like this for simplicity of reading, but it's played with a triplet kind of swing feel. So instead of the bass drum, the hi-hat played with the right foot can also replace the right hand, but let's listen to it as it is now. So left hand on the snare and rights are the bass drum. So that's the pattern, left, right, but the rights are bass drum. So again, it's broken up. It's not a steady rhythm here of sixteenths or all eighths like we've been looking at. It's sort of broken up with a bit of a space in between, but the sticking and the concept of the single stroke is still respected. And there's lots of variations to this. You can start with the bass drum and then go to the snare, so it can be in reverse instead of going daku, gaku, papu. It could go boo-bak, tuk-tak, tuk-tak in reverse. And again, finally, you can replace that bass drum with the left foot playing the hi-hat. So it gives it a whole different color. Instead of that heaviness of the kick, it'll be a lighter kind of feel with hi-hat and snare altering between the rights and lefts. So let's end off this video listening to this one more time, and we'll look at the drums and observe how the snare and kick replicate the left-right pattern. So that's it. Stay tuned, and in the next video, we'll start looking at the double stroke roll.